Good morning. Here is my finished creaturecaster Orc Forge Lord. In this video, I'll show you how he comes together, and everything will be shot at 2x speed. So to start out, we are base coating all of the skin areas with black green. The model was primed with Stynlrez black primer. And so for all of the skin areas, we are coming in with black green by Monument Hobbies. Pretty much all of the painting for this model will be done with Monument Hobbies paints. I'm base coating two different arms as I have magnetized the miniature and am planning on having both arm options available. So here you can see the second arm being painted. And now transitioning over to the armor, I was going for a sort of black and blue, real rough iron texture with this. So to start out, base coating this armor with neutral gray. It's diluted about 50-50, and what I'm doing here is finding the highlight points and putting in a lot of scratchy textures wherever I want the highlights to be. I'm making the bands of highlights a little bit bigger because I do want to go in and push the highlights with some additional colors after. A big key here is making sure that your scratches are random. So in order to help you do that, work fast, make sure that you are putting the highlights where they need to go, or you want the highlights to go. But in terms of actual brush movement, work fast, work random. The more you slow down and think about it, the more likely you will paint in patterns. So going back to the face here, we're going a big step up in tone. So from black green, we're going to shadow flesh with a little bit of magenta mixed in, and I'm creating a lot of wrinkle textures on his face. I want him to be a real old and beaten down orc. So a lot of wrinkle textures on his face. And now with his skin, same base or same color with that shadow flesh, and going in and stippling that skin tone. So I don't want it to be a smooth skin tone. I want it to look a little rough around the edges. So wherever the initial base highlights are, I'm going in with that shadow flesh and stippling in. Here now I'm stippling in using tan flesh. So wherever I want the highlights to be, same thing. I'm going in with tan flesh and stippling that in. The paint here is diluted again about 50-50, and it's going to take a lot of layers and a lot of stippling to build up that opacity in the areas where you want it to be. Going back to the face, now I'm coming in with tan flesh again, working in sort of the wrinkles that I've already painted on his face, and really pushing those. The contrast again from that black green base to these skin tones for his wrinkles are really going to stand out. So you want to make sure that you're very careful with how you're painting those. We're back onto the armor here, and to put in that blue tone, I'm using gray blue, again mixed about 50-50 with water, and within the highlights that I've already placed, going back in with that scratchy texture. So a lot of cross hatching, a lot of random line placement here to get that real weathered look that we're going for. Up next, we're taking some, adding some white to that gray-blue mix, and we're just picking out the edges. So the raised areas, like on the spikes, the different rivets, we're picking those edges out on those armor plates and pushing that contrast. This model from Creaturecaster is being released today, the same day as this video, October 12th. He's one of the smaller size models in their range, so 40 mil base, and will be released as part of their celebration of Orktober. I was fortunate enough to get this model as a pre-release to build and paint and share with the community. And here I'm going in with pure bold titanium white to just get the very tops of those edges and the highest points where we're going to want highlights on this model. And then taking that white again and doing a little bit of edge highlighting here. Now going to the shield, I wanted the shield to look different than the other metals on his body, so same starting point as the armor. Started creating that scratchy texture, but a little bit bigger in terms of scratches, and started that with neutral gray. After that, I go in with dark gray blue to create a different sort of tone. But as you can see here, really not being overly careful with exactly how I'm scratching and dinging it all up. And now you can see here there's a lot of that dark gray blue being added in that scratchy texture again, and I'm building layers with opacity to really push certain parts of the model more than others. So after I've built the layers up, I take a wash of Nuln Oil from Games Workshop and Strong Tone from the Army Painter, mix those two together, grab a real big brush, and just lather the shield. What this is going to do is sort of muddy it up, make it look a little dirty, and tone all of those colors down and create some further separation of the look from the shield to the armor plates that are on the actual orc. And it's a lot easier if you use a bigger brush here, so I have a size 4 brush from Monument Hobbies that I'm using. So after that wash is dried, I go back in with some gray blue and start adding some highlights and some additional scratches that are a little bit brighter to the raised areas. Now the light source for this I want coming from an angle onto the front of the shield and catching that front half of the shield also, and also his leg that's running forward, and a little bit of his face. So I'm leaning as you can see, I'm leaning the scratches and the highlight placement more in that direction overall. So I'm adding some bold titanium white to that gray blue, and and touching up on those raised areas that are closer to the light source. Now I'm starting to work on the rust effects. I wanted the shield to be real rusty and old, so I'm working in to the crevices and the creases, different areas where I think rust would build. The rust is starting with a dark golden brown, and then I go in with a secondary highlight of burnt orange and a final highlight of just pure orange. You see here I start putting that rust effect into the furnace of the shield. I ultimately end up changing that and painting the innards of that furnace to have more of a fire effect rather than rust. So that little part you can disregard. For the rust effect, again, where different rivets are, where you feel rust would build up, taking some semi-diluted paint consistency and just stippling it into the areas where you want that rust to be. And so I'm going to go and put this rust effect over all of the metals on this model. Overall, this is a really fun model to pick up and put together. The painting process for this model is extremely enjoyable. Definitely one that I would highly recommend, and an incredibly versatile model as well. As you can see here, painting the leg plates with that rust color, and now coming back through and highlighting or adding those additional burnt oranges and oranges to that rust effect. But as I was saying, a really fun model to paint up. Had a ton of fun painting this, and I would highly recommend picking it up. It will be a pretty versatile model as well, not only if you're into orcs, and we'll use this for any of your existing armies or future armies, but with Creaturecaster's recent announcement of partnering with Judgment, it's going to be the first model ported into use with that game. Now moving on to the cloth. For the cloth, I base coated it with Mahogany. I wanted it to be a red cloth, and Mahogany is a real beautiful dark browny red, really pigment rich, and does a great job of being a base coat color for reds. Moved on to the skulls while the cloth was drying, and for the skulls I started with golden brown on all of the raised areas. Going back to the cloth, now I'm taking some burnt red and using the side of the brush to catch the raised edges on the cloth. It's a really good technique to use the side of the brush to catch raised edges like this, or when you're edge highlighting and you don't want to get into the recesses or touch any other parts of the model. Using that edge of the brush really helps you have control. I wanted the cloth to have a textured pattern to it, but different texture obviously than the metals. So here I am with the highlight color of bold Pyrrole Red, and I'm going in a 45 degree, going at a 45 degree angle from both sides, and painting in real thin, real close lines from one direction, and then 45 degrees from the other direction to give the cloth sort of a cross-hatched texture to it. So after that's dried, I took some coal black, watered it down to a wash consistency, and I'm just reinforcing the shadows and the separation between the cloth and the belt. And then for the final highlight here, I mixed some tan flesh in with the bold Pyrrole Red, and I'm just getting the absolute tops and top raised edges, and again going at that 45-degree angle from both directions, so I get that cross hatch. Now going back to the skulls, I did a highlight of olive flesh on the skulls and painted the teeth in bright warm gray. The skulls aren't really visible. I didn't really feel like it was an area of the model that I wanted to or needed to spend too much time on. Here I am admiring my handiwork. And now going back in and enforcing some highlights to the most raised areas, again, edges, rivets, that sort of thing. And here I'm enforcing those highlights using bright warm gray, and have that mixed with a little bit of bold titanium white as well for the absolute highest spots. Additionally, I also went in and created some battle damage effects on the armor, so using some bold titanium white and then a thin line of black, creating some cut textures. I also added those highlights to the leg armor, as well as the wine bottle opener, as that was going to get some of the OSL effect that I'll be adding later. Here I am painting his hair, and for his hair I started with burnt red as a base. After I had that burnt red base, I went in with a wash of coal black, and after coal black, highlighted the hair with bold Pyrrole Red and a brighter highlight with burnt orange. And now going to the heat vents with on his furnace shield or power shield. First thing I did was paint the insides of those white. That'll take to the brighter colors a bit better. And then I went in with a burnt orange, then and stippled in burnt orange, then orange, and finally some yellow. I also took a glaze of that burnt orange and glazed it around the outsides of each of the exhaust valves to give it that sort of heated look. Now we took a big jump here. The shield has some OSL effect added to it at this stage. What I did was I took the, oh, sorry, not yet. So here I'm just adding an additional layer of highlights. So when I take the airbrush to it, that those raised areas would be reinforced as being a bit brighter. So now here I'm taking the airbrush with some Monument Hobbies transparent orange, spraying it from a bit further away, so that with the orange I'm catching not only that front part of the shield but also the boot, or the leg, and the wine bottle opener. And then here I am with some transparent yellow, working a little bit closer and really focusing on the shield, the front part of the shield, and a little bit on the base, closest to where that light source would be. I'm also being bold and spraying a little bit of that transparent yellow over the furnace or the exhaust hatches. After that, I wanted to reinforce some shadows, so I took some transparent purple through the airbrush and sprayed it on the back half of the shield and the back half of the model, exactly opposite to the light source. So the areas that are in deep shadow, obviously take the airbrush a lot closer, give it a little bit of a spray, and then overall I stay a little bit further back. And then I come back in here with a mix of bold titanium white with a tiny bit of golden yellow and reinforce the highest points on the shield again, as well as the armor. So any edges plus rivets and stuff that are closest to the light source. I'm also reinforcing the highlight of different spots of battle damage that I put on this model. The base I painted, but the videography skills weren't that great. The base was just painted with the dark and bright warm grays, a couple different browns and greens, sort of a mishmash of wet blending, and then the airbrush with some for the OSL and darker tone on both sides gave it a little bit of more contrast between the two halves of the base. And then finally with some bold titanium white, just catching some of the edges that are facing the light source on his wine bottle opener. And that's about it for this video. And here is the finished Orc Forge Guard. I did spend a little bit of time going back in on his face and painting his eyes a little bit, eyes and teeth a little bit more menacingly. That's not something that I could have done on camera, unfortunately. Plus I painted that fire effect in on his furnace. Overall, I'm really happy with how this model turned out. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're interested in the model, please take a look at creaturecaster's website, which will be linked down below. If you have any comments or feedback, please leave them in a message below. I'd love to hear what you think about this video and what you think about this style of process. And as always, if you like this video, please like, subscribe, and press that bell button to follow along.